We acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians on the lands on which we meet today, or wherever you're listening to this podcast, and their continuing connection to the land, waters, and communities of Australia, and the lands from all around the world upon which you might be joining us today, either live or on your favourite streaming service. We pay our respects to them, their elders past, present, and emerging, and elders from Indigenous communities around the world. Welcome everyone to our Coaching Café. It's Natalie Ashdown here with you once again, and today we're talking about maintaining confidentiality whilst navigating stakeholder requirements. We're in the ethics area of the ICF Core Competencies and having a deep dive into the ICF Core Competencies. And I'm joined on the line today by Paula Jones-Hunt, our resident HR specialist. Hello to you, Paula.
Hello everybody, lovely to be here.
And it's been great. We've just been talking to everyone, finding out where they're dialing in from, morning, afternoon, and evening in some countries. We have Beijing, we have Wellington, we have Auckland, we have Canada, we have down the road at the Sunshine, up the road at the Sunshine Coast. We've got New York City represented, Canada. Everyone's dialing in from all around the world. So welcome to you all. And Sydney. Great to have the Sydney siders with us. So before we begin, let me acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands on which we're all meeting today, wherever you might be meeting or listening to this on your favourite streaming service, either morning, noon or night, and their continuing connection to the land, waters and communities of Australia and the lands from all around the world, wherever you might be joining us. We pay our respects to them and to their elders past, present and emerging, and elders from Indigenous communities from all around the world. Welcome to you, Jill, dialing in from Thailand. We are really well represented across the world today. So today we're going to be deep diving, as I mentioned, into our ICF Core Competencies. For the past couple of weeks, we've been looking at demonstrates ethical practice, one of the number one or the first core competency we have in our ICF Core Competencies. And we have been looking into ethical practice. For those of you that need to tick off ethical practice for your ICF renewals, these coaching cafes will do that for you. In particular, we're thinking about maintaining confidentiality and the area of stakeholder agreements. So if you are new to the Coaching Cafe, welcome. We come together at this time every Friday. We are due for a break and then we'll upload our next range of coaching cafes for you. I have been coached on the line already. So we'll be uploading those onto our website at opendoorcoaching.com.au, and you can register for the webinar. So welcome. If you're new, we do this every Friday. If you're a regular, welcome back. You know, we love connecting with you, creating communities, sharing learned experiences, thought-provoking conversations, and of course, those ICF CCEs, if you're listening to it live, will be available at the end of the session. So let's get into our conversation. Now, a couple of years ago, when the ICF, International Coach Federation, updated the core competencies, this was the first update to the core competencies that had happened for years. So it was a really significant update. As workplace coaches, as leaders, as managers in workplaces, in our organisations, I was very happy to see these updates to the core competencies, in particular because, in my opinion, for the first time, the International Coach Federation really acknowledged as part of the core competencies that workplace coaching is alive and kicking and has been for many years, since the early 1980s, as a matter of fact. But it was the first time that they really included in the ICF Core Competencies elements, I suppose, that matter to us as workplace coaches and as professionals. And in particular, one of the things that they updated was in that demonstrates ethical practice. And for those of you that can't see the slide, I'll read it out to you. It's number 5, actually, in the demonstrates ethical practice. It says, maintains confidentiality with client information per stakeholder agreements and pertinent laws. And number 6 is maintains the distinctions between coaching, consulting, psychotherapy, and other support professionals. So we did that. We looked at that last week, which was great. Good conversation that we had. Number 3, apologies for jumping around a little bit, but we also have there uses language appropriate and respectful to clients, sponsors, and relevant stakeholders. And number 1, now I'm working backwards, demonstrates professional integrity and honesty in interactions with clients, sponsors, and relevant stakeholders. So relevance, clients, sponsors, and relevant stakeholders is included in competency 1. It's included in competency 3. It's included in competency number 5. And I thought it was in 6, but it's not. So under demonstrates ethical practice, we've got 3 mentions of sponsors and relevant stakeholders. Now, this is really significant for us, as I said, because all of a sudden it actually gives us guidance as to demonstrating ethical practice in organizations where we all work, either in our organizations or for our organizations. And that's our topic for today. We do put in place stakeholder agreements, and we do put in place proposals, if you like, coaching agreements, etc. And we also are involved in debriefing upfront, doing needs analysis with stakeholders. So because of that, our ethical practice really comes into play here, and that's what we really want to focus on, and that's the topic of conversation for today. So what we want to offer you is a way of thinking about this. And if you'd like to jump into the chat and tell us your comments, we'd be happy to pick those up as well. And of course, Paula will get your insights as well. The way that we want to think about this, for those of you that can't see the screen, is we've got a triangle here. We've got the coachee, and the coachee could be an individual or a group. We've got the stakeholder, and we've got the coach. So there's a 3-way triangle. And what we're thinking about in terms of ethical practice is which way does the information flow and which way does the feedback flow as well. So how do we exchange information and maintain confidentiality? Oh, sorry, I've gone too far. Jump that, go back. So Laura, you've asked a really good question up the front. What's the difference between a sponsor and a stakeholder? Well, it's a really good point, actually. I think they're actually potentially the same. We see the sponsor as the person who's sponsoring the program. They might actually be the one who is paying for the program. For us, the stakeholder is the language we use. It's anyone who's got an interest or a stakeholding in the actual program. So the sponsor, for example, could be the general manager of HR. The sponsor could be an executive who has said, I want all my people to receive executive coaching, or I want my team to be coached. And the stakeholder could be one of the managers of someone being coached. Paula, you see this a lot. Do you want to comment on that difference between sponsors and stakeholders?
Well, you could also consider it as the sponsor is the organisation and the stakeholder is the manager who is undertaking, who is asking for their staff member to be to receive some coaching. So, but I agree with you on the basis that it's generally who's funding. If we're talking about sponsorship or stakeholders, it's who's funding if it's not the individual.
Yes, so recently I took a brief just last week. When I say take a brief, what happens here is I met with 2 people. One person was the L&D manager, and the other person was the manager of the person who is going to be the coachee in this situation. So I would see that the sponsor in that situation is the learning and development manager. The money for the coaching is likely to be coming out of their budget. The stakeholder is the manager, and I met with that manager to find out what they want in terms of coaching for their coachee. So this is a really good example, actually, and a really great question. Thanks for kicking us off, Laura, because quite often this triangle, this stakeholder triangle, will have one or more people actually involved. It could be the general manager or the executive manager of a business unit or a function, and the stakeholders could be that person's direct reports. And we're going to coach those direct reports. We're going to coach those teams. So don't forget here, we're not talking about remedial coaching either. I mean, we will do some remedial coaching, but most of our coaching is around high performance. It's about leadership skills. It's about bringing out the best in the person. So when I'm talking about stakeholders and sponsors here, we're talking about that person that is actually giving us the information on what they actually need. Hoping that makes sense to everybody. The coach is ourselves, whoever. Yes, that's a good point, actually, Laura. And yes, the sponsor and the stakeholder could be the same person. So the same organization that I talked to last week, the learning and development manager wanted me to coach their team. And so, yes, they are the stakeholder and the sponsor. The money's coming out of their budget as well. So there could be more than one stakeholder as well. Depending on the situation, you might have one or more. There could be 2 or 3 people. Anyone that's got an interest in the program happening, and the outcomes of the program as well. So it's the outcomes that they're interested in as well. So we take a brief, we call it a brief. We do a needs analysis. For those of you that have done our certificate for in workplace and business coaching, you will recognize this diagram from that program, and you'll also know about the conversations we have around needs analysis. So we will do a needs analysis conversation, and in that conversation, we're trying to understand from the stakeholder, what do you actually want? What are you trying to achieve from the coaching? We're trying to get the background information to the coaching program, to the coaching the individual or the group. We're trying to understand what are the challenges that they're facing. Ultimately, what are the outcomes and what are the metrics? What's the form of measurements that we actually wanted to see from the coaching program? So all of that information we are gathering from the stakeholder. So the information flow between the coach and the stakeholder is that kind of information at this point. Now, what's interesting here also is with myself and the Open Door team, I could be the stakeholder. So I'm taking the brief. I feel like we need lots of different diagrams here, but I'm a stakeholder now as well, because I'm taking the needs analysis and doing the brief with the client, finding out, and then I will appoint the appropriate coach. So if I'm not the coach, I become a stakeholder. I've got an interest in the success of that program. I'm working with the client to make sure that the program is implemented, and I'm working with the coach as well. So we have to think about ourselves, if you have a team, what your role in the agreement is as well. And the arrow that we have going between the stakeholder and the coach is agreed information flows. And this is where we maintain our ethics. This is where we maintain confidentiality. In that initial conversation, we have to agree between the stakeholders and the coach what information is going to flow between them. And we at Open Door have been caught out with this. We had an excellent arrangement set up. The information was agreed up front. And then we got new stakeholders, and they wanted more information. And we couldn't provide that information because it would have been a breach of confidentiality and a breach of our ethical practice. So we're discussing this with you today because many years ago now, we actually faced that situation. It was an ethical dilemma, if you like, and we had to work our way through that by educating the stakeholder about what we could and couldn't give. So the information that flows between the coach and the stakeholders is limited to, in our organisation, it's limited to that the coaching conversation has happened. So the date of the coaching conversation, that there's progress that's been made, as in the coaching conversation's been had. So the date of the coaching conversation, how many coaching sessions are left to go. And if there's any other agreed information, like we agree that we're going to let the stakeholders know about key themes. Now, we would only do that if we've got a very large number of coachees. So we're running a large program, there's 25 coachees involved, three different coaches, 25 people involved in the coaching. And we might share with the stakeholders that there's a very strong theme around communication at the moment, or there's a very strong theme around worry about the reorganization within the organization. So there's worry or there's concern about how do we maintain business whilst we are going through the restructure. So that's a key theme that's coming out of all of the coaching. And it is what we call de-identified. So we're not giving the actual coachee who said what. So we're maintaining confidentiality there. So two things have to happen. We have to agree that with the stakeholder, and we have to agree that with the coachee. So when we meet with the coachee, we're actually going to say, this conversation is confidential. Everything you share with me is confidential, unless you share something with me that I have a duty of care to report. And the only reporting that I'm doing is sharing key themes across the entire program. So that's when we've got a large program that we're running. If it's just a one-on-one kind of once-off coaching program, then we'll say if there's anything that we need to report, which is normally only that the coaching is progressing. So there you go. Hopefully that's opened up some ideas for you to start thinking about and just starting to narrow down our thinking. Paula, I'd be keen to hear your thoughts based on what we've shared so far. And if anyone wants to jump into the chat, please do.
Yeah, I think the key with this is not ever assuming that the stakeholder understands the coaching process. So there's lots of people who, I mean, and I worked in HR, there's L&D people, and they think you get a coach and the coach, and they've never done it before, or it's worked differently somewhere else. And then they're assuming that you're going to provide them with information that you wouldn't. So I always go in with I often say, there's some things that we need to say out loud so that we all agree that we've heard these things. And one of them is around that confidentiality piece, because we just shouldn't, you should never assume that they know the information that we know about the confidentiality. And I often find that it is the one thing that really helps coachees is when you say this out loud as well, because they're worried that you want them to feel like they can express what they need to express, because that's what we want them to do, without fear of someone not finding out what they've said in the sessions. So saying it out loud to them as well is really critical.
Yeah, I think that's really great that you offer that, Paula. And I do agree. Two things you've offered there. One is, let's not assume that everybody is on the same page. And the second thing is, let's state it out loud that these are the terms and conditions from an ethical practice point of view that we're actually operating under. Absolutely. So I will pick up a couple of comments we've got in the chat in just a moment. So we've talked about the coach and the stakeholder. We have to agree that information that flows there, and that has to be agreed with the coachee as well. And then the other part of the triangle is the information between the coach and coachee. As I said, that information is confidential unless we've made a prior agreement, or unless there's a duty of care that you share something with me that ethically I have to act upon. Make a referral to a support service or something like that. I can tell you, for what it's worth, I've been coaching now for 22 years. I have never had anything that I have felt was a duty of care. If it was the case, if there was something that I needed to do, of course I would discuss that with the coachee first, and then we'd be having that conversation to try to work out what has to happen and how we need to move forward. I got close once when a coachee said, I feel like going into that meeting and just blowing the whole thing up. And that comment was made during quite a volatile time for that person, and also quite a volatile time for the world, in fact. And it occurred to me, for whatever reason, a heightened sensitivity, that I needed to just properly double check, what did they mean by that? Were they threatening any acts of violence? And of course they weren't. But anyway, she laughs nervously. But yeah, so in 22 years, I've never had that situation. So the other thing to think about is the coachee and the stakeholders. So it brings up the questions that you're asking in the chat now. Thank you. We are trying to encourage the coachee to share information with the stakeholders. So rather than us telling the stakeholders how the coaching's going, we want the coachee to share that information with the stakeholder. And we want the stakeholder to take an interest in the coaching. We want the stakeholder to be involved in the coaching, to support the coaching, to support the behavioural change if there's going to be behavioural change that's coming out of the coaching. So again, that's agreed up front, and we talk about what that might look like and how they might facilitate that. So rather than, as I said, us giving information to the stakeholder, we want the exchange of information, the shared information, the feedback going backwards and forwards between the coachee and the stakeholder. So that's the coachee and the coachee's manager, or not everybody that's involved in the actual coaching relationship. But if there's others that are involved, we want that to be really clear. You notice I say we want the stakeholders involved, and we want the stakeholders involved in terms of supporting the coaching behaviours, what's happening, ask questions about it, because the coachee is likely to be working on leadership behaviours or whatever they're working on. They're going to go back into the workplace and try to do something different, and they're going to need support potentially to do that. So that's where we want the information flowing. Let's pick up some of these questions and comments here as well. Sometimes we have parents sponsoring their adult kids in making career transformations. Yes, that's true, Jocelyn. Thank you. I'm curious if you had insights on how to navigate that. Yes, I would come back to what I've just said, Jocelyn, that we want the information to be agreed. We want to agree with, say, the parent sponsor and their adult child what information is going to flow and how it's going to flow. And having that upfront conversation that Paula talked about is really important.
Natalie, the thing I think about here is it's their story to tell. So when you think about how information is coming back, it's their story to tell. If they're having great success, if they're working through something, you want them to go back and tell their story, but it's their story, not your story.
It's a very good insight, Paula, and I feel like I need to write that one down. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely right. It comes to the point of we're not guaranteeing success. We are not attached to the success or otherwise outcomes or the outcomes of the program. We're doing our best to facilitate, to enable, to do everything we talk about from a coaching point of view. Ultimately, it's up to the coachee to go away and take those actions, be accountable, do whatever they say they're going to do. And as you said, tell their story, practice their leadership habits, whatever it might be. So, yeah, great comment. Eleanor has said, I found it's key to remind the stakeholder/sponsor that I'm not performance managing the staff for them. Yes, agreed. We are not the performance managers. We might be doing performance coaching, high performance coaching. We might be enabling higher performance within the workplace. Think about shifting, lifting, raising, changing performance. That's what we're being brought in to assist, but we're not doing the performance management. And it's a very critical point you bring up there, Eleanor, because that's where the information share, feedback flow between the stakeholder and coachee comes into it. The other point I want to raise there also is if I'm receiving information from the stakeholder and it's obvious that it's around a performance management issue, as in underperformance, then I want to, and I will always ask the stakeholder, to what extent have you shared this information that you're sharing with me with the coachee? Have they been given the feedback that you're sharing with me? And I tell you that because of past experience. I went into a coaching conversation. I sat down with the person and I said, so there's been a lot of information shared with me and I'd like to get your perspective on it, blah, blah, blah. And the coachee said, what's been shared with you? Because I have no idea. And I'm like, oh, ethics flags going off all over the place, red flags going off, because I don't know what to say now. I don't know, can I share what I've heard? Because I thought it was agreed. So rookie mistake, from that moment on, I always say what information has been shared. And by the way, the stakeholders said that they had shared information with the coachee, and I don't actually think they had. So there was a bit of a dilemma going on we had to sort out there. A regular occurrence in this is Mary Jo, thank you for jumping in. A regular occurrence in my work, I have the participant or the coachee schedule a kickoff meeting, yes, with their leader and me. The first part of the meeting is identifying the rules of the road. The bulk of the meeting is what the coachees see as their strengths and what they want to add to their professional development, and what we'll work on as a coach, what they'll work on with the coach. Yeah, absolutely. So that three-way kickoff meeting, the three-way triangle, as we say, we really want to do that. We don't always get the opportunity to. We don't actually like doing coaching assignments where the three-way hasn't happened first, but sometimes everyone's too busy. But if that's the case, so we agree with you there, Mary Jo, for sure. We want the rules of engagement to be clear. That we kind of take it for granted, don't we? That's why we're reminding ourselves about this, and we're taking the time out, because we are talking about ethical practice here. Yeah, thank you. After approximately 6 sessions, the 3 reconvene, and a review session is being held between what's been seen and revisiting the goals. So yes, thank you, we do that as well. Both of these meetings are run by the coachee. So note there what Mary Jo said. It's excellent practice, in my opinion. The meeting is booked by the coachee as a 3-way. The review is booked by the coachee as a 3-way, and the meetings are run by the coachee. Perfect. I find sometimes the parents want to tell us things. Oh, yes. So that's the same sort of thing, Jocelyn, where the stakeholder wants to tell us things. Yeah. Can I please ask how you recommend navigating initial conversations where the stakeholder, HR, or leader wants to provide extensive context about the person and the purpose of the coaching, almost like expecting the coaching to be performance management versus leadership coaching? Yes, thank you. Shihana, in exactly the way that we've talked about, actually, they might want to provide extensive background. So I will give it back to the person by asking the question to say, to what extent have you shared this information with the coachee? What have you done so far? If it's a performance management, pure performance management, what have you done so far in the performance management? What do you want to see from a leadership coaching point of view? And here's one more tidbit. If I get a sniff of underperformance and performance management, that they are doing coaching before sacking the person or making the person redundant, I will ask the question, what decisions have been made already around this coaching situation? Because I don't want to set us all up for failure, that you're doing coaching, but the person is going to be made redundant already. So very, very good points, being very clear about what's happening in terms of underperformance and performance plans and performance management processes versus what the coaching purpose is. So excellent distinction. Thank you.
You can also throw in there, Natalie, what are your expectations of the coaching?
Yeah.
Because it will help you get a feeling as to whether or not where they think this is going to go. And then and I think sometimes too in there's that additional piece around understanding what the coaching is and what it's not, because I think some people do think that it's a fix everything magic wand.
Yes, indeed. And so, yes, being very clear about what the purpose of the coaching is very important. And I will ask the direct question, actually, what decisions have been made around this person's future? And it might sound a bit direct. It's really important that we know, because an ethical practice comes into here as far as I'm concerned. What else have we got? Yeah, great conversation, everyone. Thank you so much. Eleanor says, yes, I now have a 3-way meeting for the same reason when it's not group coaching program arrangement. So this, yes, those 3-way meetings, Three-way meetings for group coaching and for individual coaching as well. What is it the stakeholder wants to, I beg your pardon, what if the stakeholder wants to attend one of the one-on coaching sessions with the team? Oh, that's a good point, actually. If the stakeholder is part of the team and we're doing team coaching, I want the stakeholder to be part of the team. I prefer their participation, though, rather than observation. I don't like observers, because if you're just in the room, if that person's just in the room observing, it takes away, it changes the dynamic within the room. It takes away, in my opinion, what people feel comfortable to share because they're being observed. So come in, be part of the coaching. I don't have a problem with that, but you can't sit up the back of the room on your phone or tapping away on your laptop, so-called observing. And of course, you learn by your mistakes, don't you? I allowed that to happen once and never again. They go like, oh no, I'm just listening. I'm just here listening. I'm just here observing. Tap, 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 scroll, scroll, scroll. It drove me nuts. So I had to fix that. Yeah. Great conversation. Clear about never coming between the coachee and their manager. Very good comment, Mary Jo. Thank you. And Eleanor says, I have a no bystander rule. Oh, I like that. That's a good way of summarizing it, isn't it? In coaching and workshops, which I'm very clear about, and it's where I start from, it's the worst otherwise. And I agree with you. Absolutely. Well, thank you, everyone. It's been a great conversation. I, once again, really want to acknowledge you. We are all coming together for this conversation to focus on our ethical practice. We're focusing on things that perhaps other people take for granted. But rather than do that, we're spending this time to really reflect as professionals about what our code of conduct means and what our ethical practice means. So there is a lot of people on the line, and I want to acknowledge you from all around the world for coming and doing this with us. It's just great. Thank you so much. So with that in mind, we have a lot of what we've been talking about is in our certificate for and workplace and business coaching program. We've got our diploma of leadership coaching if you really want to take your coaching skills and coaching culture within organizations, emotional intelligence, critical thinking, all of that to the next level. Talk to us about that. Of course, we do have executive coaching, mentor coaching, mediation services. And as we always say, as we sign off for another week of the Coaching Cafe, thank you again for joining us to discuss ethical practice, and we wish you all the best with your coaching.